Good morning and welcome to Allison Heimes, legislative candidate from Legislative District 39. Thank you, Allison, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, volunteer state president, and advocacy lead volunteers Joyce Beck, Ira Nathan, and Mike Barwig. Mike is also a constituent of LD 39 as well. Allison, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. So to get us started, Allison, if you want to start off by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign, maybe in 5 minutes or less, that would be great. And then once we've completed that, we'll move into the question portion. So welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And Mike, let me know if you have any questions later. So my name is Allison Heimes. I live in Elkhorn, and I have lived in Elkhorn since 2013. Before that, I lived in Omaha proper because I was attending the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and I went to Creighton for law school after that. I stayed in Omaha after moving here from Lincoln. That's where I sort of grew up and went to high school and everything. I lived in Scotts Bluff for a period of time as well, but I was born in Omaha originally, so my family just kind of moved around Nebraska. But I stayed ultimately because I got married, and so my husband is in the military, and it's full-time active duty National Guard. So that means Nebraska will forever be home. And he's sort of been stationed out of Lincoln and Ashland and Utan, and but ultimately Elkhorn is where we've decided to reside because we love the school districts and we love the neighborhood. So I love being here. My day job is as an immigration attorney. When people think of immigration, they often think of asylum seekers, people who are crossing the border, and I did represent people who were seeking asylum or had humanitarian needs, like people from Haiti or areas that have been affected by climate change. But I haven't done that in quite a few years now. So now I do corporate immigration. So that's representing companies that want to hire somebody maybe in software engineering, and that person went to school at UNL, but they're actually born and raised in India. So then we help make sure that we secure that visa so they can work for that company. That's what I do full time. I have served on the board of a few charitable organizations. I was on the board of Center for Holistic Development, which is an organization that focuses on mental health for people in vulnerable areas. And then I was the Omaha liaison for the Honor and Remember Nebraska chapter, which provides ceremonies and flags for those who have lost loved ones in any time of service, and then first responders as well. So I got involved in that organization because I lost my brother who served in the military. He died from suicide in 2017. And so they honored me with a flag. I thought that was beautiful. So I helped that charitable organization for a few years. And then I am also on the Lost Team Advisory Board for the Kim Foundation, which is also a suicide prevention organization. So clearly you can tell that my focus is very mental health based. I am running for office on a campaign of mental health reform because of the loss of my brother. But then working with the Kim Foundation for the last 5 years, unfortunately, I've realized that I am not alone in that loss. That is something that affects everybody. We may not lose everybody to loss, but there are certainly people who are struggling with their mental health right now, whether that is anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, you name it. So that is my passion. But I'm a mom of 3 kids. I've got a 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 3-year-old. 2 of them go to the public schools. 1 of them's in daycare, and all of the challenges that come with raising kids. And then I've got 2 dogs, I guess. They're not in here right now. I put them out because they like to bark. So Chewy and Trip. And now I'm open to you. Any questions?
Allison, thank you for sharing about your personal life, your personal background, as well as what you're running on. I do want to send my condolences about your brother. I know that has been a very passionate issue for you, and it's always hard when we go through those things, and appreciate you're moving forward to try and make things better for those that might be in the same situation. I also want to thank you and your family, especially husband, for his service to our country and to our state. So thank you for doing that. Our next portion, we're going to move into the question section. We have provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50 plus in Nebraska. We're looking to allot about 5 minutes for each of these questions. Again, these are issues when we talk to our members that are first and foremost important to them. And so that's why it's our purpose to bring them forward to candidates to have these discussions about those issues. Question number 1 deals with health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. And Joyce Beck is going to take that. So go ahead, Joyce.
Allison, thank you so much for taking your time this morning. And I appreciate the fact that you have taken a tragedy in your life and turned it into a passion to help others. That's very commendable. 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say staying in their homes as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services, as well as area agencies on aging, become important assets to caregivers as they care for loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of their loved ones, but it also provides a relief to an already strained long-term care industry. So, Allison, this morning I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, what would you do to protect or expand the home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of a sufficient workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And then the second question, Allison, is what would you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
So this is a multifaceted issue, certainly within our community. When you talk about this issue, I immediately think aging in place, how important that is to people to make sure they stay where they grew up, where they were raised, where they have families. And although it would be ideal to have families be able to take care of their loved ones as they age, that's not always the reality for everybody. And so we do really need to have a concerted effort on the part of the state to make sure that we're funding programs that already exist that help with things like assisted living, senior centers, things like that. I know that my grandmother worked for the Midland area. Let me think of the acronym real fast. Midland Area Agency on Aging. Yes, she retired a couple years back from that out in Hastings, but she would talk to me about how valuable it was to get grants from the state to do things like fund Meals on Wheels, which is, I don't think that's what they call it, but basically mobile meals programs. And then the sort of services that they offered to provide community-based engagement with seniors, and how valuable that was. So ultimately, my response to making sure that these things stay alive is funding from the state. I don't really see another option. We need to be investing in these programs. We have a community that is aging. What do they call it? The silver wave?
Yes.
Like the aging community in Nebraska, it is just a fact. And so we have to make sure that we're taking care of, those people. The second part of your question, though, is how do we maintain a workforce that is going to make sure that that is providing the care to these aging citizens? And that is a very tricky question, but I can tell you that I'm working with the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce on this issue right now. They have a special coalition that they've put together. Something Thriving Communities is what they're calling it. And they're about to announce here in a few days what their big plan is. But how do we recruit more workers to the state? How do we encourage people to get back into the workforce that maybe preemptively left the workforce during COVID, but they weren't necessarily of retirement age? And really, it is about creating a more welcoming environment in the state of Nebraska. We need to make middle income housing a thing, because right now it seems like it's either low income or extremely out of reach. And so we need to bring back that sort of, average cost and stop pricing people out of homes. We need public transportation to be available so that, it's a more walkable district. We need childcare to be available for people so that they can enter back into the workforce. I know that even my own sister-in-law had to wrestle with that at one point, whether it was worth working when the entire salary that you earned went into childcare. And ultimately, she chose to stay home, but I think that was realistically probably something she wanted to do for a while, because she wants to raise her kids. But for a lot of people, it is something you're forced into, staying home. So providing these sort of resources on the state level is, I think, what will bring people back into the workforce to make sure that we have employees who can provide the services that we need for our elderly citizens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Joyce, for asking the question. Allison, our second bit of questions kind of switches over into another topic called consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. And Mike Barwig is going to take that. So go ahead, Mike.
Good morning, Allison. So scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams such as wire transfers, gift card scams, and schemes involving real property. Nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. With that in mind, our questions for you are: consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices, and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? Would you support 1, enacting laws to require merchants to sell gift cards to post notices? 2, enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund. And 3, implementation of preventative or corrective measures to assist in combating owner-seller housing impersonation fraud.
Yeah, so I'm willing to look at anything that would be considered a solution to this problem. Nothing is off the table at this point. I can tell you that this is a very personal issue for me because my other grandmother, not the one that ran the Midland Area Agency on Aging, but my other one, she was actually a victim of this, where they called her, convinced her to give them access, I think, to her Amazon account, and then they accessed all of her information through that. And then got into her computer. I mean, it was so fast, like the snap of your fingers fast. And by the time she realized what was happening, I think she lost like $5,000. So wanting to make sure that absolutely that money is secure, that it is insured, that they can get that back. But there are schemes that go well beyond that take people's retirements and ultimately force people out of their homes. I think it starts with the individual. I think we obviously need to be providing literacy for web pages and how to identify when somebody is scamming you in an email or in a phone call, making sure that they understand that the IRS is not going to call you. Like, that is not a thing. They do not do it. And so that literacy piece is really important. We can do that through senior centers and flyers and even emails, making sure that people have access to this information, but that is not enough. It needs to go further. There needs to be some accountability on the part of the banks, identifying when these things happen and making sure that they're protecting senior citizens from it happening. And I think penalties to individuals, increasing an interest in law enforcement to actually hunt these individuals down, because I don't think there's enough of an interest to do so. It doesn't have a huge payoff in the end. And so we need to be incentivizing that. I know that nobody went to jail for the crime against my own grandmother, so, but it is theft at a large scale. So absolutely, I'm for protecting. It doesn't just happen to people of a certain age either. It could easily happen to me or my husband if we weren't being vigilant, so these types of protections should absolutely exist.
Very good. Thank you for your answers. And just so you know, AARP does have Fraud Watch. We help educate our members against these as best we can.
Absolutely. I knew you would.
Thank you, Allison. And I'm sorry for your grandmother's loss, but I think you hit it right on the head that this doesn't, it doesn't matter what your age, what your occupation, your education level, this is hitting everyone of all sorts of walks of life. And so this is a very important issue to AARP and want to continue to work on the issue. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Our last question, now we're going to switch you over in more of our, and you've kind of already used the term livable communities, but and affordable housing, but we want to specifically go back to that concept of helping people stay in their homes and communities. So Susan DeCamp is going to take that. Go ahead, Susan.
Hey, Allison. It's nice to have you with us today. So our final question is kind of a long question, and it's a two-part question. So Nebraskans over age 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population. I think you referred earlier to it as silver wave. And
like that, it's dignified.
research shows that most want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. As housing costs continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize, and thus they're being pushed out of the community and the homes that they've lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs, intergenerational housing, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And the second part of the question is, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to that tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
Yeah. So this is also an issue that probably has solutions that come from different committees, that have ultimately different bills that will work together to address this problem. But I do think it starts with taxes. I think that we should make sure that we're not taxing retirement, that we keep the homestead exemption. But that I liked John Kavanaugh's bill that suggested expanding that even to make sure that people that were in new homes were still benefiting from the ultimate plan of not taxing the first, I think, 100,000 valuation on that home. That could really, really assist, especially in people who want to downsize, buy new homes. They're not going to immediately have that home paid off, but especially if it's a smaller sized, smaller, less square footage home, that they're not paying an enormous amount of money. Now, as much as we'd like to say that people can easily downsize, that's just not the case, because there's not a lot of home builders that are incentivized to build 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom homes anymore. Even my 3-bedroom starter home ended up selling for a great deal more than what I actually bought it for. And you'll find that there's just not a lot of options out there that are smaller. There's a couple villas here and there, but for people who really do want to downsize, it's not as available. So we really need to be incentivizing home builders to build those smaller, more affordable homes, middle income homes. I was thinking about this after the tornado actually hit Elkhorn. The neighborhood that it hit was probably one of the few middle income housing areas in the district. You had 1-2-bedroom homes that were actually hit. They were older homes, and those people, I hope that they increase their insurance on that home enough to have it fully covered by that tragedy. But the reality is, even if they wanted to rebuild, I don't know that they could find a home builder that would rebuild the same floor plan, So the odds of them being able to build on that property are not high. And you probably have people that are just going to opt to move to a different area. And that's truly unfortunate. And although a tragedy is causing me to think about this, I think that absolutely applies to people who are retiring, who've paid off their homes but can't afford the property taxes in the area because they're going up. So making sure that we're addressing that as an issue too. I definitely have people talking to me about how they've paid off their home, but property taxes keep going up. And then when you're on a fixed income, it forces you into a position where you'd have to move. And yeah, absolutely, I am invested in changing that and making sure that people can actually stay where they've lived for generations, and keeping family homes in the family.
Great. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Allison.
Thank you, Allison. And I do appreciate when you use the word incentivize, because I think that's really what more of the focus of the legislature is trying to become on, especially on affordable housing, and really working with the cities, the builders, municipalities, however, to find ways that would incentivize them to actually build these types of homes. So I appreciate your thoughts and comments on that, and definitely would love to have further conversations with you as you get to the legislature on that. We're now coming to the end of our meeting and our time. And so in closing, Allison, I want to give you back a few minutes to talk specifically about what your priorities, and I know you've kind of already started this to talk about this and other questions and at the beginning, but what priorities you have for serving in the legislature, and if there are any specific issues or committees or whatever that you plan to work on or address during your time as a state senator. So I'll give you that time back to close out.
Thank you so much. You find as we have these discussions, that as you ask questions, that I have tangentially been working on all of these issues, maybe in response to something else, but everything is connected. So my focus on childcare, because I have children of, small, they're very young, I need childcare in order to stay in my job. And it became difficult to find available childcare for all three, affordable childcare, and how connected that is to the workforce and making sure that people can stay in the workforce. And so that's really what inspired me to work with the Chamber of Commerce on that issue. But yeah, that's a huge focus of mine, is making sure that childcare is available, that we solve the worker shortage, that we support public schools, because they often offer a lot of these services that we're talking about, after school care, making sure that parents can stay in the workforce and pick their children up later. But that all requires funding. And then my number one, mental health, affects everybody. This is not something that happens in a vacuum. It's not something that just happens in the military, although that is my focus because of my whole life is wrapped up in the military. But my involvement in the Kim Foundation has put me in front of a lot of different peoples of different ethnicities, religions, age groups. And I have been to a call out for a suicide of someone who was of retirement age. They were sick and just didn't feel like they had the community or the options to stay in this world. And that's truly heartbreaking. So I hope that my emphasis on mental health reform is something that touches each of you as well, because as we see in the aging population, that isolation that happens when you lose all your friends and your children move out of state or become busy with their own lives, that loneliness that creeps in, and how much we need to offset that with things like community centers and making sure that we create groups that focus on making sure we check in with one another. We provide activities for people to do, and meaningful activities, get people engaged and back out into the population. One thing my grandmother does after she retired is she works for, it's like a secondhand store, but she absolutely loves it. And she sees kids all the time when she does it. And this gives her great meaning. It's something she volunteers to do, and she really likes doing that, but presenting people with those opportunities as well, and partnering with programs that maybe need workers in that way, but, on a part-time sort of, first come, first serve type basis would be the best way to do that, just to keep people engaged. And that's my focus in this race, is to make sure that mental health services are extended to everyone. So I hope that you identify with some of those goals of mine. Obviously, there's a lot more that comes into play here, but I think these are the top ones that come to mind. So if you have any other questions, please reach out to me. I do have a website and a Facebook and an Instagram and a TikTok, and however you want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allison, for taking the time to visit with us today. We wish you the best with your campaign. And most importantly, thank you for meeting with AARP today. Take care.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Allison.